awaken your spirit. Chosen ones. The most uncomfortable moment in any room is when someone realizes they've been understood better than they planned. That moment doesn't come with noise or drama. It comes with a pause, a slight delay in their response, a laugh that lands half a second too late. You didn't accuse them. You didn't corner them. You didn't even raise your voice. Yet somehow the air shifted, and now they're looking at you like you just read a page you were never supposed to see. Here's a fact people don't like admitting. Most adults repeat the same behavioral patterns for years, sometimes decades, with only minor cosmetic changes. The words change, the outfits change, the excuses get better, but the structure stays the same. And once someone spots that structure, the magic trick is over. That's usually the exact point where people start asking, half joking and half nervous, "How did you know?" Not because they're impressed, but because they're checking how exposed they are. What makes it unsettling isn't intelligence or intuition, it's attention, real attention, the kind that doesn't get distracted by charm, confidence, or a well-timed story, the kind that notices rhythm instead of volume, cause instead of excuses, timing instead of promises. You weren't decoding secrets, you were watching reruns. And that's where the humor sneaks in, because while they're busy trying to look unreadable, you're just mentally noting, oh, this episode again, same setup, same twist, same ending, different season. The funny part, you never announced anything. You didn't claim insight. You didn't make it a performance. Yet somehow you've got grown adults slightly uneasy, replaying their own behavior in their heads, wondering when you caught on, not because you're intimidating, but because you're precise, and precision has a way of making people very, very aware of themselves. Number 1. You noticed patterns they didn't know they were repeating. Most people think they're spontaneous. They believe every reaction is fresh, every decision is new, every response is carefully chosen in the moment. But after a while you start seeing something else, the same delays before answering, the same deflections when responsibility comes up, the same charm rolled out at the same moments. It's not personality anymore, it's repetition, and repetition is readable. What made the difference wasn't brilliance or intuition, it was attention mixed with patience. You weren't rushing to label or judge, you were letting time do the talking. People reveal more through what they repeat than through what they explain. They can change the words, adjust the tone, even switch roles, but the structure stays loyal to them. That's the part they don't notice, because they're too busy managing appearances. Patterns show up in small, boring moments. How someone reacts when they're late, how they respond when they don't get credit, how they handle silence, disagreement, or success that isn't theirs. These moments don't feel important, so people don't guard them. That's where the truth leaks out. Not once, but again and again. You didn't need a long history or insider information. You just needed enough repetition to stop believing each moment was isolated. Once you connect the dots, behavior stops feeling random. You realize they're not improvising. They're following a script they've been running for years. And the thing about scripts is this: the person performing them rarely knows the audience can predict the next line. That's why they get shaken when you respond differently. Not impressed, unsettled. You didn't react how they expected. You didn't fall for the usual move. You didn't play your assigned role. That's when the question slips out, wrapped in humor or disbelief. How did you know? What they're really asking is when you noticed the pattern and how long you've been watching. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. You didn't know anything special. You just stopped resetting your memory every time they spoke. You remembered. And once you remember, repetition becomes obvious. That's the moment people stop feeling mysterious and start feeling exposed. Because patterns don't lie, and they don't forget. Number 2. You listened for inconsistencies, not confessions. Most people think understanding someone comes from what they say. They wait for admissions, explanations, or dramatic confessions, believing that words carry the whole truth. But real insight doesn't live in statements. It lives in contradictions. The truth hides in the small gaps, the half-beat delays, the subtle mismatches between what someone says and what they actually do. Listening for confessions is lazy. Listening for inconsistencies is precise. That's where the real story lies. When someone tells you a story, they're often telling you what they want you to believe, not what actually happened. They dress their actions with intention and polish their mistakes into lessons or jokes. But if you pay attention to the details that don't line up, the cracks appear. Timing, emphasis, hesitation, choice of words, repetition, or lack of it, these are the breadcrumbs they leave behind, often unconsciously. And if you follow those crumbs carefully, the pattern of truth emerges, sharper than any self-written confession ever could. It's a subtle skill, because it requires ignoring the noise and focusing on what doesn't fit. People will brag, deny, exaggerate, or charm their way through conversations. The surface can be convincing, entertaining even, but it rarely tells the whole story. Inconsistencies, however, are hard to fake consistently. They appear in small, repeatable ways, moments when words and actions collide. That's where attention becomes your superpower. The moment they notice you catching it, they don't usually panic about the obvious. They panic because they didn't expect anyone to notice the invisible. You're not confronting them with lies. You're reflecting their own behavior back with precision. That's why the question, "How did you know?" slips out almost involuntarily. It's not about secrets. It's about the fact that someone saw the spaces between words, the unsaid, and the patterns they never admitted to themselves. When you train your mind to focus on inconsistencies instead of waiting for confessions, you stop being fooled. You stop reacting to the story they tell and start seeing the reality they can't hide, even when they desperately try. That's the kind of attention that leaves people shaken, not because you know everything, but because you notice what they thought was invisible. Number 3. You read outcomes, not intentions. Most people get caught up in what others say they mean. They hang on to promises, explanations, or excuses, assuming that if someone's intention sounds good, the result will eventually follow. That's a trap. Intentions are cheap. Everyone has them, but very few turn them into reality. What matters isn't what someone claims they wanted, it's what actually happened, what they produced, and the ripple of consequences that followed. Reading outcomes instead of intentions means paying attention to evidence, not just words. It's subtle, because humans are experts at selling themselves. They can explain a failure, justify a mistake, or dress a small win like a victory. They can act convincingly for months or years, and it can fool even those closest to them. But outcomes don't lie. They reveal priorities, habits, and patterns that no amount of storytelling can erase. If you want to know someone's truth, don't look at what they claim to want. Look at what they consistently create, avoid, or destroy. Actions are a language. Results are a statement. This approach also flips the usual perception of insight. People think you're psychic or intuitive when you notice the truth, but really, you're just paying attention to reality. You observe consequences instead of excuses, and slowly, the narrative they've built around themselves unravels. The gaps between what they say and what they do become glaringly obvious. That's when people get unsettled, because they realize someone has been tracking the story they didn't know was visible to anyone else. Reading outcomes over intentions isn't cynical. It's brutally honest. It doesn't require suspicion, only clarity. You don't need them to confess. You just need to follow the trail they leave behind in real life. And when you respond based on that, rather than their explanations, the shift is immediate. That's why they ask, half amused and half nervous, "How did you know?" It's not because you guessed or pried. It's because you were paying attention to reality, and reality doesn't bend to anyone's version of the story. Number 4. You understood incentives before emotions. Most people try to figure others out by chasing feelings, assuming that fear, desire, or anger explain why someone acts the way they do. That's where they get stuck. Emotions are loud, messy, and changeable. Incentives, on the other hand, are quiet, but far more revealing. They drive behavior consistently, whether anyone admits them or not. Once you understand what someone actually gains from their choices, the reward, the advantage, or even the avoidance, you stop being fooled by the surface drama. Incentives are everywhere, but subtle. They're not always money, power, or recognition. Sometimes it's comfort, avoidance of conflict, or simply staying in a position where mistakes can't be traced back to them. People act the same way over and over because incentives are invisible engines, quietly pushing them toward predictable outcomes. Emotions flare and fade, but incentives are the silent choreography behind every move. Once you see that, the world stops feeling random. You start noticing that every decision, every spontaneous reaction, lines up with what the person stands to gain or avoid losing. The real edge comes from noticing incentives before anyone else does. When someone assumes you're reacting to their fear or excitement, they underestimate your precision. You're not caught up in their emotional display. You're watching what drives them, and suddenly everything they do makes sense. The charm, the deflection, the overreaction, it all points back to a benefit, not a feeling. That's why when you respond correctly, they're shaken. They expect their emotions to be persuasive, to confuse, to mask their intent. Instead, you bypass the noise entirely. You act based on the engine of their behavior, not the smoke and mirrors they put up. It's not manipulation, it's clarity. And clarity has a way of unnerving people. They don't even realize you're tuned in to what truly moves them until they hear or see the response that exposes the logic behind their actions. Understanding incentives before emotions isn't just smart, it's surgical. It allows you to see the world as it really is, not as people pretend it to be. And when people realize you're seeing their moves before they even act, the question always comes, how did you know? It's not a compliment, they're just caught. Number 5. You watched how they move when nothing is at stake. Most people think pressure reveals character. They look for how someone reacts under stress, assuming that moments of tension expose the truth. That's partly true, but it's incomplete. The real insight comes when nothing is at stake, when there's no audience, no expectation, no immediate consequence. That's when people stop performing, stop polishing their image, and start showing the habits, preferences, and patterns that actually define them. When someone believes no one is watching, their choices become unfiltered. Their gestures, tone, and focus are no longer tailored to impress or manipulate. They reveal priorities, what they enjoy, what they avoid, who they ignore, and how they treat the world when recognition isn't involved. That's the raw material most people overlook because it's quiet, subtle, and easily dismissed. But for those who pay attention, it's more revealing than any dramatic crisis. You start seeing consistency, or the lack of it. Some people act kindly when they stand to gain nothing, while others act self-interestedly, even when generosity costs them nothing. Some people create, explore, and experiment for no reason other than curiosity, while others do nothing unless there's validation attached. These are the real signals. Patterns that persist in calm moments are the foundation of who they are, and you can predict their reactions, motivations, and even future choices from these small, unguarded behaviors. Watching someone when nothing is at stake also exposes authenticity. People who only perform under pressure, for reward or for recognition, reveal themselves as conditional. Those who consistently act with integrity, even in trivial moments, reveal their true nature. And when you respond based on that understanding, they're caught off guard. They expected you to react to their crafted persona, not the underlying reality they unconsciously reveal in everyday, consequence-free moments. The subtle power here is in observation, not confrontation. You don't need them to prove themselves. You only need to notice, remember, and connect the dots. And once you do, the unspoken truth becomes clear. The way they move when nothing is at stake tells you everything you need to know. That's the quiet shock that makes them pause and wonder, how did you know? Number 6, you clocked their timing, not their words. Most people think understanding someone comes from what they say, assuming words carry the weight of truth. That's only half the picture. The real insight lies in timing, the pauses, the hesitations, the split-second decisions that happen between words and actions. Timing doesn't lie. It reveals priorities, comfort zones, and hidden intentions in ways that polished speech never can. People rehearse their stories, but they rarely rehearse the rhythm of how they deliver them. That rhythm, if you pay attention, tells everything. It's subtle. Someone may sound confident, charismatic, or convincing, but if their timing falters in tiny, repeated ways, it betrays inconsistency. The delay before a response, the speed at which they pivot topics, the moments they rush versus the moments they linger, all of these are more revealing than the content of their words. It's the space between what they say and what they do that exposes the real story. People can script sentences, but they can't fully script instinct, habit, or pattern. Timing is instinctual, and instinct doesn't lie. Clocking timing also reveals control or lack of it. People who manipulate naturally, who are aware of their influence, move deliberately, choosing when to speak, when to act, and when to retreat. People who hide, deflect, or avoid responsibility often give it away unconsciously through timing missteps. Those microseconds, those pauses, the beats they can't perfectly hide, show you what matters most to them. This skill doesn't require confrontation, judgment, or interrogation. It's quiet observation paired with connection. You notice the patterns, remember them, and respond with precision. When you react in a way that aligns with their real rhythm, not the story they're trying to sell, the effect is disorienting. They thought they were guiding the interaction, but you've already anticipated the moves they didn't even know they were making. Timing reveals truth without words. It exposes priorities without accusation. And when someone realizes you've been reading the spaces they couldn't control, the question always comes out half in awe, half in disbelief. How did you know? It's not cleverness they're responding to, it's accuracy. And accuracy hits where performance cannot. Number 7. You recognized borrowed confidence. Most people think confidence is an unshakable force, something that radiates naturally and commands attention. That's only part of it. What many fail to notice is that a lot of confidence is borrowed, taken from situations, applause, approval, or the perception of authority. Borrowed confidence is fragile. It only exists when the environment supports it, when the audience is convinced, or when the stakes are low enough that pretense can hold. The moment you spot it, you see the cracks before anyone else does. Borrowed confidence is easy to mistake for authenticity because it's practiced and polished. People wear it like armor, projecting certainty even when they're unsure. But it leaks through the smallest moments, a hesitation, a forced laugh, a word overemphasized, a story repeated too often. These are the micro signals that reveal someone is leaning on perception rather than substance. The more you pay attention, the easier it is to see that the bravado isn't self-generated, It's a performance, and performances are predictable. Recognizing borrowed confidence also gives you insight into motivations. Someone who relies on borrowed certainty is often protecting something, an insecurity, a secret, or a gap in capability. Their behavior isn't random. It's a series of calculated moves meant to keep the illusion alive. Once you see the pattern, you understand why they act the way they do under pressure, why they seek approval constantly, and why they flinch when their authority is subtly challenged. The effect of noticing this isn't loud or confrontational, it's quietly unsettling. People assume you admire or fear their confidence, but the truth is you've seen past it. You're aware of the difference between substance and facade, and when you respond from that awareness, it disorients them. The borrowed confidence that kept them comfortable suddenly feels exposed. They realize their armor is thin, their performance transparent, and that someone has already mapped the mechanics behind it. Recognizing borrowed confidence isn't about judgment, it's about precision. It allows you to anticipate reactions, understand real priorities, and navigate interactions with clarity. When someone realizes you've seen through the facade without a word being spoken, the usual response is a mix of awe, disbelief, and subtle panic, wrapped in the inevitable question, "How did you know?" It's not flattery. They're just caught off guard by accuracy. Number 8. You saw what they avoided more than what they chased. Most people focus on what others want, assuming that desire reveals the truth. Ambition, dreams, and goals are easy to point at, but they often hide more than they show. The real insight comes from what someone avoids, what they skirt, what they refuse to face. Avoidance is a compass. It reveals fear, weakness, insecurity, or unspoken priorities in ways chasing never does. What someone runs from tells you more about them than what they reach for, because avoidance is consistent, subtle, and rarely performative. Avoidance shows up in patterns you might miss if you're distracted by words or surface charm. It's in the topics they dodge, the people they sidestep, the responsibilities they shift, and the decisions they delay. These behaviors aren't random. Every avoidance points to an area of discomfort or risk, and over time, these patterns create a map of someone's true boundaries, their vulnerabilities, and the limits of their courage. People rarely advertise what they avoid, and that's why noticing it gives you such a sharp edge. What makes this particularly powerful is that avoidance is silent. People don't brag about what they refuse to do. They rationalize it, make excuses, or disguise it as choice, but it's still avoidance. And the more you pay attention, the more it becomes obvious. It's in the half-hearted effort, the repeated deflection, and the subtle tension that shows up whenever the subject comes close. Avoidance isn't loud, but it's persistent. When you act on the knowledge of someone's avoidance, the effect is subtle but deep. You understand the invisible lines they draw for themselves. You know the spots where they are predictable, where they'll hesitate, and where they'll falter. They don't realize you've mapped these patterns because nothing was ever said aloud. And that's when the unsettling question appears. How did you know? It's not about admiration. They're shaken because you've read the spaces they thought were hidden. Watching what someone avoids gives clarity that chasing never will. It shows you not just who they pretend to be, but who they really are, the gaps between words and actions, and the unspoken truths they try to keep under wraps. That awareness leaves you one step ahead, quietly, without drama, and unmistakably accurate. Number 9. You understood that people rehearse lies, not reactions. Most people assume that when someone slips up, it's because they weren't careful, that mistakes are accidental. That's only partly true. The deeper truth is that people spend far more energy rehearsing the lies they tell than the way they react to situations. Lies can be polished, perfected, and repeated like scripts. Reactions, however, are instinctive, fast, and rarely practiced. That's the gap that reveals everything. When someone lies, they focus on the words, the delivery, the story they want you to believe. They rehearse the details, the phrasing, even the humor or charm meant to distract. What they rarely practice is how they'll react when their story is challenged, contradicted, or subtly exposed. That's why micro-expressions, hesitation, tone shifts, or defensive gestures slip in. Reactions are raw, lies are calculated. Observing those unpolished reactions gives you access to the truth hidden behind the rehearsed words. Understanding this allows you to see beyond the story someone tells. While they're busy controlling the narrative, you're watching the instinctive response, the pause before a word, the way their body shifts, the subtle tightening of their voice. These reactions aren't planned, and they don't lie. They reveal fear, guilt, overcompensation, or hidden intentions in ways that the polished lie never could. The lie is loud. The reaction whispers. The brilliance of noticing this isn't confrontational. It's predictive. You don't need to accuse or expose. You simply observe, connect the dots, and act with awareness of the underlying truth. When someone sees that you've read their reaction instead of their rehearsed story, it's disarming. They expected to control perception with words, not anticipating that the truth was already evident in how they responded when they thought no one was watching closely enough. Recognizing that people rehearse lies, but rarely reactions, gives you an advantage most overlook. It allows you to predict behavior, see through deception, and understand intentions without a single confession. When they realize you've noticed, they don't ask out of curiosity. They're unsettled because the invisible mechanics of their lies are suddenly visible, and that leaves them thinking, how did you know? Number 10. You stopped romanticizing complexity. Most people are addicted to the idea that everyone has a deep, hidden side, or that behavior is always mysterious and profound. They look for layers, subtleties, or secret motivations, convinced that understanding someone requires decoding an enigma. The truth is far simpler and far less flattering. People are often predictable, messy, and driven by obvious needs. Complexity is often a story we tell ourselves to make someone seem interesting or intimidating. Once you stop romanticizing it, everything becomes clearer. When you stop searching for hidden depth, you start seeing patterns for what they are, not what you hope them to be. You notice that charm is often a shield, that drama is often a habit, and that mystery is often just inconsistency or insecurity. People can seem complicated because they repeat behaviors in unpredictable contexts, but underneath it all, the drivers are almost always simple: fear, desire, comfort, or avoidance. Recognizing this removes the fog. You stop overthinking motives and start observing outcomes and patterns with brutal clarity. This shift is quietly powerful. It lets you interact with precision instead of guesswork. You stop getting distracted by theatrics, charisma, or self-proclaimed depth. You see the actual levers controlling behavior, incentives, habits, and vulnerabilities. Complexity might impress observers, but to someone paying attention, it's usually a cover for the obvious. Once you acknowledge that, responses become intuitive, reactions predictable, and misdirection ineffective. People don't expect others to see through the layers they've carefully constructed. They assume admiration or fear will keep you fooled, and they're often caught off guard when you bypass the illusion entirely. You don't need drama or confession to understand them. You just need honesty about human behavior and attention to patterns that are right in front of you. Stopping the romanticizing of complexity isn't cynical. It's liberating. It turns subtle observation into sharp insight and removes the confusion that usually clouds judgment. When people realize you've stripped away the illusions and are reacting to the real mechanics of their behavior, the reaction is unmistakable. Awe, discomfort, and that inevitable whispered question, "How did you know?" They're not impressed. They're unsettled because the veil they relied on has been lifted. Number 11. You noticed who benefited from confusion. Most people think chaos is accidental, that misunderstandings and messes happen randomly. The truth is far sharper. Confusion is often engineered, and someone is always benefiting from it. People rarely admit when they gain from uncertainty because the power in it is subtle, quiet, and invisible to those not paying attention. But when you start watching who gains from disarray, hesitation, or misinformation, everything clicks into place. Patterns emerge where before there was only noise. Confusion works because it shifts attention. People get distracted, second-guess themselves, or defer responsibility when they're unsure. Meanwhile, the person who understands the mechanics of the situation quietly positions themselves to take advantage. They don't need to be loud or aggressive. They just exploit gaps, exploit assumptions, and exploit moments of indecision. Observing who benefits doesn't require accusation. It just requires noticing alignment, where chaos exists, and who walks away stronger because of it. This is powerful because it turns a passive problem into an active insight. Most people get frustrated by chaos and blame circumstances or other people. You, however, see the invisible architecture of advantage. You see who thrives when the rules are unclear, who manipulates uncertainty to protect themselves or gain leverage, and who subtly redirects attention away from themselves. Understanding this allows you to anticipate moves, navigate complexity, and respond in ways that keep you steps ahead of those who depend on confusion to control the outcome. Noticing who benefits also exposes intentions without confrontation. You don't have to call someone out to know their strategy. You observe, connect the dots, and act with awareness. And when the person benefiting from confusion realizes that someone has mapped the pattern behind their advantage, the reaction is immediate. They're caught off guard because the invisible advantage they relied on is suddenly visible. Understanding who benefits from confusion isn't clever, it's precise. It gives you clarity in situations that seem chaotic, and it leaves people unsettled without a word being spoken. The unspoken question always surfaces. How did you know? It's not admiration, it's recognition that their subtle manipulations have been seen, decoded, and understood. Number 12. You trusted your pattern recognition over social politeness. Most people get trapped in politeness, assuming that being liked, agreeable, or diplomatic is more important than noticing the truth. They nod, smile, or laugh along, even when red flags are glaring, because they fear tension or confrontation. The problem is that politeness is a blindfold. It clouds judgment and lets patterns slip past unnoticed. Real insight doesn't come from being agreeable. It comes from observing, remembering, and connecting the dots, even when social norms would rather you look away. Pattern recognition is subtle, quiet, and cumulative. You don't need a dramatic revelation to see the truth. You just need consistent attention. Small behaviors, repeated gestures, habitual responses, they all form a map if you pay attention. People may be smooth, charming, or articulate, but their habits betray them over time. Laughs that don't land, promises that vanish, moments they avoid, and actions that contradict words, all of these build a predictable framework. Trusting this framework over surface-level niceties allows you to understand people in a way politeness never could. The real power of this approach is in its invisibility. You aren't confronting anyone or creating drama. You're observing quietly, following the invisible rules that govern behavior rather than the social scripts that govern conversation. When someone assumes their charm or storytelling is enough, Your attention to patterns undermines it without a word. You respond in ways they didn't expect because you're responding to reality, not to appearances. That's what unsettles people. They aren't impressed by insight. They're shaken because their attempts to manipulate perception have been anticipated, mapped, and countered silently. Trusting pattern recognition over social politeness also changes how you navigate relationships. You stop being distracted by flattery, excuses, or theatrics. You start reacting to behavior itself, seeing the predictable motives and likely outcomes. And when people realize that you've noticed what they thought was invisible, the question always comes out, how did you know? It's not admiration. They're shaken because the veil of politeness they relied on has no power against someone who observes, remembers, and acts with precision. Number 13. You realized predictability scares people more than judgment. Most people assume that what unsettles others is criticism, exposure, or confrontation. They think someone being called out is the shock that matters. The truth is far quieter and far more effective. Predictability terrifies. People feel safe when they believe they can manipulate, deceive, or surprise. But when someone can anticipate their moves, they feel exposed in a way no judgment ever achieves. Being predictable in your attention, your observation, and your responses removes the uncertainty they rely on, and that's what shakes them to the core. Predictability isn't about being boring or rigid. It's about consistency in noticing, remembering, and reacting to behavior rather than words or appearances. You respond the same way to the same patterns every time, without hesitation, without being influenced by charm, excuses, or panic. Over time, this creates an invisible framework. The person realizes that nothing they do is accidental, nothing escapes attention, and nothing changes the outcome you've already mapped. That's terrifying because they've built their world on chaos, misdirection, and manipulation. And now those tools no longer work. This insight also reveals why subtlety is more powerful than loud confrontation. People may expect judgment to sting or accusations to bruise, but what really destabilizes them is the quiet certainty that someone sees through everything all the time. You don't need drama, anger, or exposure. You simply need consistent observation and measured response. They sense that every move they make is anticipated, every excuse noted, and every inconsistency remembered. When predictability becomes your power, the reaction it triggers is unmistakable. People become nervous, cautious, even slightly defensive because they realize they can no longer control how you perceive or respond. The usual tricks that protected them, charm, misdirection, hesitation, lose their effect. And then comes the inevitable question, often whispered or half-joking. How did you know? It's not admiration. They're shaken because the one thing they relied on, uncertainty, has vanished. Predictability exposes patterns, and patterns never lie. Once someone realizes you operate from that place, they understand the unspoken truth. You see everything, remember everything, and react exactly as the pattern demands. Number 14. You didn't know, you concluded. Most people think insight comes from intuition, luck, or some mysterious sixth sense. They believe understanding someone is about sensing a vibe, catching a hunch, or magically reading minds. The truth is far more precise. You didn't know anything in the mystical sense. You concluded. You observed, recorded, connected dots, and let patterns lead you to the truth. That difference is subtle, but devastating, because conclusions are grounded in reality, not assumptions or wishful thinking. Concluding requires patience and attention. You didn't jump to judgments based on a single interaction or a clever line. You noticed repeated behaviors, inconsistencies, timing, avoidance, incentives, and reactions. You compared stories to actions, words to outcomes, and patterns to intentions. Each detail alone might be meaningless, but together they formed a clear, undeniable map. You weren't guessing. You were tracing the mechanics of behavior, quietly calculating before anyone realized the full picture existed. What makes this particularly unsettling for others is that it doesn't feel like insight. They can't accuse you of bias, manipulation, or luck, because it's the product of careful observation and deduction. Your conclusions are invisible until they're revealed through your precise reactions or responses. You respond based on what's actually happening, not what someone claims, pretends, or wishes. And that is what shakes people, the realization that someone has understood them without relying on rumor, confession, or performance. Concluding also strips away mystery. People assume their secrets, habits, or manipulations are hidden, but your conclusions see through the veil. They don't have the dramatic satisfaction of being caught in a lie because you didn't confront them. You simply acted with awareness of the truth. Your calm precision, rooted in fact rather than assumption, leaves them exposed in the quietest, most disarming way. When people ask, "How did you know?" it's never about admiration. They're unsettled because the reality of their own behavior has been mapped and understood without theatrics or guessing. You didn't guess, you didn't sense, and you didn't hope. You concluded. And that clarity, that cold, methodical understanding, is what leaves them utterly shook. Every interaction leaves a trail. Every pause, hesitation, repetition, and choice carries more truth than words ever could. What separates someone who is truly perceptive from the rest isn't intuition or luck. It's attention, patience, and the ability to observe without judgment. You notice patterns, inconsistencies, outcomes, and avoidance. You read incentives, reactions, timing, and subtle shifts that most people ignore. You see past borrowed confidence, engineered confusion, and polished lies, and you respond based on reality, not appearances. The power in all of this isn't loud. It's quiet, precise, and almost surgical. People don't get shaken because you called them out. They get shaken because you saw everything they assumed was invisible. You didn't guess, hope, or rely on instinct alone. You concluded. You connected the dots, tracked behavior over time, and acted from clarity rather than assumption. And that level of awareness changes everything. It allows you to understand motives before they're revealed, anticipate actions before they happen, and navigate the world with an edge that almost feels unfair, but is simply rooted in observation and understanding. When someone realizes that their habits, choices, and hidden tendencies have been noticed without a word being spoken, they can't hide behind charm, excuses, or theatrics. The silence is undeniable, the precision is unmistakable, and the effect is profound. This is the subtle power of seeing the truth behind behavior, the skill of interpreting reality while others are distracted by appearances. If you found value in this breakdown, and you want more insights that sharpen perception, enhance understanding, and leave people a little unsettled in the best way, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit like, drop a comment with your thoughts or experiences, and share this with someone who needs to see the hidden patterns in their world. Your attention to detail matters, both here and in real life, and together we'll uncover the truths most people never notice. Stay awakened, chosen ones.